Welcome to 5 and 5 from the One Stop Co-op Shop, where I discuss 5 key elements of a game in about 5 minutes. I'm Michael Kelly, and today I'm reviewing the Against the Shadow expansion for War of the Ring, the card game. And no disclaimer needed for this one, my buddy bought both the core game and the expansion at Gen Con. I'm a huge fan of the Lord of the Rings IP, and I love the original War of the Ring board game. How does the card game do? Let's find out and get to the list. So my number 5 point, which is generally a pro for my taste, is the thematic integration of the game into the Lord of the Rings narrative. Now, I won't say it's better than its Big Daddy War of the Ring, which is still the finest Lord of the Rings game out there for my money, but they have all the major characters, events, and items you want to see show up. They make sense for what they do. Their powers are consistent with what you would expect to see them doing. And, you have interesting choices, just like in War of the Ring, for sort of alternate scenarios. Like, what if, Pippin and Merry focus more on helping Frodo and Sam instead of going off to Rohan and Gondor? For just an entirely card-based game, I think it captures the overall Lord of the Rings narrative really well. My number 4 point is focused on the core things you're fighting over in the game, the battlegrounds and paths, and this is a bit of a mix for my taste. On the potentially negative side, despite all the theme stuff I just talked about, in the end you are just kind of counting icons you put on these locations and seeing whose icons win out, and it's going to get you victory points, and you see who has the most points at the end, so that's not necessarily too exciting. But on the positive side, these battles can be pretty epic and tense, and it is a very tough choice to decide which ones you want to actually go for, especially in attacking the enemy where they are strong and which ones you want to defend. And even though they are still basically battles, I like the paths you have to fight over each round and how their mechanics differ slightly from battles and how the people are limited in where they can show up. So it does help more with that thematic integration, the choice of when to battle for a battleground or for the path and like where to commit your characters is really cool. My number 3 point for my taste is also a mix, and that's focused on the new Automa in the expansion that allows you to play solo co-op. So this is the flowchart card that controls their actions, and actually this part is a pro because while it might look intimidating at first, it's incredibly simple once you start playing. So that part's actually pretty good. Their turns tend to go very quickly, and this is sort of a micro-turn game anyway, so you wouldn't want to have them taking forever. But the negative side of this is in strict contrast to what I just said, because since the AI is playing a ton of cards, we'll talk more about that in a second, and some of these cards have different actions you got to keep track of when they might trigger or not, and you also have to math out which locations they can win and which ones they can't win, because that's going to control where they go. As the Automa goes along, it becomes much more unwieldy to figure out what their actions are and figure out how you should run their turn. But then we get to my only full-on con for the game. And disclaimer before this one, I'm certainly not an expert at the War of the Ring card game. I've only played it about 9 times for this review. So some of this might just be that I'm not as skilled as I think I am, or maybe I'm getting some rule wrong. But the first thing I'll note, and this is not just for the solo co-op game, they have a bunch of different ways to play, like 1v1, 2v1, 2v2. And my assessment, and this is what I've seen online as well, is that 2v2 is really the best one and really the only truly good one, because there is a ton of swinginess inherent in the 1v1 and 2v1 play. But the other part of this con, and this again might come down to my experience, maybe I just don't know the game well enough, is that I find it ridiculously hard. So what they've done is, for a player to play a card, you have to also cycle a card. So even if you have like a hand of 6 cards, you're only going to on average play 3 of them. But for the enemy, to simplify things, they just had them play every card in their hand, and they don't have like that extra cost. They just put out so many cards. Now, I do think it's easily house ruled. I've already got a few myself that make the difficulty more in line with what I need. But the fact that you have to do that, again, if I'm playing correctly and not just being bad at the game, is certainly frustrating. But the potential negative of the balance on the enemy side goes right into my number 1, a full pro for my taste, which is the card play on your side. So as I mentioned, you'll have, 3, 4, or 5 cards in hand. And to play one, which is what you'll be doing most of the time, you have to cycle it. But the choices don't stop there, because not only are you deciding which you play and which you cycle, but you're also deciding where to put them. You can put them right on the battleground or right into the path, or you can save them in your reserve for a future turn, but then they aren't allowed to move for the rest of that round, which means now they're locked down if the enemy activates another battleground you didn't expect them to, or plays more more cards than you thought they were capable of. So there are really tough choices. And then also with the cycling, I love how this plays into the thematic limitations of the timing of the game, like how certain people can only help the Fellowship at certain times in the story or different battlegrounds coming up. Because, I might not need Elven Warriors right now. And in most card games, that would suck. I drew the wrong cards, but now I can just cycle it and it's going to come back around later. Oh no, I got Andoril, but I don't have Aragorn or Strider to play it on. Well, that's okay. I'll just cycle it when I play somebody else. So the choices are great. The card play is inherently interesting. I think this core kind of aspect of the game is great. So overall, you might enjoy the War of the Ring card game if you really like the Lord of the Rings IP, if you like tense tactical choices with card play. But on the other hand, you might want to avoid this one if you don't like really challenging games or you aren't okay house ruling to make the game a little bit easier, because unless you're way better than me, I'm finding it very difficult. And also, you might want to avoid this one if you get annoyed running and managing Automa. The basic play of them is pretty simple, but it can get a little bit onerous later in the game when they have a ton of cards. Thanks for watching, everybody. Good gaming, and I'll see you at the next stop.